At the track's edge, Sophie Rae stood quietly, her blonde hair woven into a loose braid, her faded t-shirt and worn sneakers marking her as an outsider. Toilet cleaners lost, a voice sneered, dripping with contempt. To them, she was misplaced, insignificant. But they didn't know her truth. She had once coached Olympic champions, her wisdom forging gold. Today she ran not for glory but to honor a promise to her late sister who had believed in her when the world hadn't. Her every step was a testament to love and resilience. Where are you watching from? Share your hometown. This story is sprinting across the globe. In the crisp autumn air of a prestigious university campus where ivy clung to stone walls and ambition pulsed through every manicured lawn, Sophie Rae stood alone, a quiet figure at the edge of a bustling charity race. At 26, her pale blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her gentle features softened by a life of unspoken struggles. Her faded t-shirt, thin from years of wear, and worn leggings clung to her frame, while her old running shoes' heels, frayed from countless miles, bore the marks of a past she rarely spoke of. She had come not for glory but for a promise to run again, as she had vowed to her late younger sister, whose memory lingered in every beat of her heart. The event, a university-organized fundraiser, buzzed with energy, students in sleek athletic gear, coaches barking instructions and journalists weaving through the crowd, their cameras flashing. Sophie, unnoticed, registered quietly, her presence as unassuming as the morning mist, as she knelt near a chain-link fence to tie her shoes, her fingers steady despite the weight of her solitude. A group of female students clad in pristine Lululemon outfits spotted her. Their laughter, sharp and careless, sliced through the air. "Who invited the housewife?" one sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. Another, phone in hand, recorded a TikTok, her caption cruelly glib: "When your aunt shows up to race Gen Z." The words stung, though Sophie's face betrayed no reaction. She had endured worse years of scraping by, of being dismissed as too poor, too plain, too invisible to matter. The students saw a woman out of place, a charity case who dared to step into their world. They didn't know her story, the nights spent caring for her dying sister, the dreams deferred to raise a child alone, the Olympic hopefuls she had once trained, their victories, a testament to her brilliance. They saw only her faded clothes, her scuffed shoes, and assumed she was nothing. Sophie tied her laces with deliberate care, each knot a quiet act of defiance. She stood, her posture unyielding, and drew a deep breath, the kind that steadies the soul before a storm. The crowd around her buzzed with anticipation, oblivious to the woman they had mocked. Runners stretched, their designer sneakers gleaming, while spectators placed bets on the university's star athletes. The race was a spectacle, a blend of philanthropy and pride, but for Sophie it was something far deeper, a chance to honor a promise, to reclaim a piece of herself that life had tried to bury. Her sister's voice, bright and unwavering, echoed in her mind. "Run, Sophie, run for us both." She had stopped running years ago, her track days traded for survival, but today she would answer that call, not with words but with every stride. The students' laughter faded into the background, their taunts no match for the fire kindling within her. Sophie's hazel eyes, sharp and resolute, scanned the track ahead. She didn't need their approval, nor their recognition. She had coached champions, her strategies whispered in the ears of Olympians who had stood on podiums because of her. But life had a way of rewriting stories, and hers had been one of sacrifice, of choosing love over ambition, family over fame. Her sister's illness had stolen her from the world too soon, and Sophie had poured her heart into those final months, holding her hand, promising to carry her spirit forward. This race was not about winning. It was about keeping that promise, about proving that the woman they mocked was far more than her circumstances. As the announcer called runners to the starting line, Sophie moved forward, her presence still unnoticed by the crowd. The students who had laughed now turned their attention to the track, their phones poised to capture the spectacle. They expected a show, a parade of youth and privilege, not the quiet woman in faded clothes who stood among them. The journalists, too, were focused elsewhere, their lenses trained on the university's stars. Sophie didn't care. She wasn't here for their headlines or their applause. She was here for her sister, for the girl who had believed in her when the world hadn't, for the part of herself that had been buried under years of struggle. The starting gun was moments away, and the air crackled with tension. Sophie's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a clarity that comes from knowing exactly why you're standing where you are. The students' cruel words, the TikTok caption, the dismissive glances, they were nothing compared to the weight of her purpose. She had been underestimated before, written off as too poor, too ordinary, too broken to matter. But Sophie Rae was no stranger to storms. She had weathered loss, poverty, and heartbreak, emerging each time with a quiet strength that no one could take from her. Today she would run, not to prove them wrong, but to remind herself who she was. As she positioned herself at the starting line, her worn shoes planted firmly on the track, a hush seemed to settle over her as if the world itself was holding its breath. The crowd's chatter faded, the laughter dissolved, and all that remained was the pulse of her own resolve. She wasn't just a runner, she was a survivor, a coach, a sister, a woman who had carried more than they could ever know. The gun was about to fire, and with it something greater than a race would begin. Sophie wasn't here to compete. She was here to reclaim what had been stolen, to run, not just for herself, but for every person who had been dismissed, mocked, or cast aside. A storm was coming, not of anger, but of truth. And Sophie Rae was its heart, ready to break free with every step. Beneath the golden autumn sun, where the university's sprawling track gleamed like a ribbon of promise, Sophie Rae stood at the edge of a charity race, her presence as unassuming as the breeze rustling the campus oaks. At 26, her pale blonde hair was tied back, her faded t-shirt and worn leggings, a stark contrast to the sleek athletic wear of the students around her. Her old running shoes, heels scuffed from years of use, bore the quiet scars of a life shaped by sacrifice. The crowd, students, coaches, and journalists buzzed with anticipation, their eyes fixed on the university's star runners, oblivious to the woman they had mocked moments before. Sophie, however, was not here for their gaze. She had come to keep a promise to her younger sister. Lost to cancer, a vow to run again, to carry her spirit across the finish line. The weight of that promise steadied her, even as the sting of derision lingered in the air. 6 years earlier, Sophie had been a national track prodigy, her name whispered in athletic circles as a near-certain pick for the Olympic team. Her stride was poetry, her discipline, unmatched, her future, a constellation of gold. But when her sister's diagnosis came, the world shifted. Sophie walked away from the track, trading stadium lights for hospital rooms. Her dreams of glory surrendered to the quiet, relentless work of caregiving. She held her sister's hand through chemo, read her stories, and promised in tear-streaked whispers to run again one day for her after her sister's death. The track fell silent. Sophie buried her past, moving to a small town where she worked as a librarian, her days spent shelving books and living simply. Her apartment was modest, her life unremarkable to those who saw her. Her glorious past, a secret kept even from herself. No one in that sleepy town knew the woman who stacked novels had once outrun the wind. On the university track, as Sophie warmed up for the qualifying, round her movements caught the eye of a veteran coach standing near the bleachers, his weathered face etched with decades of watching runners lit with recognition. There was something in her form, the fluid grace, the controlled power that stirred a memory. He squinted, trying to place her, whispering to an assistant about a runner from years ago, a name that had vanished too soon. Sophie, unaware of his gaze, stretched quietly, her focus inward. The students around her, clad in designer gear, saw only a woman out of place, a housewife they had mocked with laughter and a cruel TikTok caption. They didn't know her history, couldn't imagine the fire that had once burned in her, now rekindled by a promise she refused to break. During the warm-up run, a female student, her ponytail bouncing with confidence, pulled up alongside Sophie, her pace aggressive, her eyes glinting with challenge. She was one of the university's rising stars, her Lululemon outfit a badge of privilege. As she matched Sophie's stride, she leaned in, her voice sharp with condescension. "What you here to raise money with a pity story?" The words were meant to wound, to assert dominance on a track where she assumed she belonged. The other runners nearby smirked their chatter, a low hum of amusement. Sophie didn't flinch, her hazel eyes steady and piercing. Met the girls for a fleeting moment. Then with a voice soft but unyielding, she said, "I'm here to keep a promise to someone who's gone." "Why are you here?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound, stripping away the girl's bravado. The student faltered, her pace uneven, as if Sophie's words had shifted the ground beneath her. Sophie's response wasn't just a retort. It was a declaration of purpose, a reminder of the stakes that drove her. She wasn't running for charity points or social media clout. She was running for her sister, for the girl who had believed in her when the world hadn't, for the part of herself she had buried in grief. The student silenced, fell back, her confidence rattled by the quiet strength of the woman she had underestimated. The coach, watching from the sidelines, scribbled a note, his curiosity deepening. He sensed something extraordinary in Sophie, a spark that hadn't been extinguished, only dormant, waiting for this moment to flare. As the qualifying round began, Sophie took her place at the starting line, her worn shoes planted firmly on the track. The crowd's attention remained on the university's stars, their names blazoned on banners, their futures already mapped in sponsorships and accolades. Sophie was invisible to them, just as she had been in her small town in the hospital in the years of quiet survival. But invisibility had never defined her. She had coached Olympians, her strategies shaping their triumphs, her mind as sharp as her stride. Life had demanded sacrifices, but it hadn't broken her. It had forged her, tempering her resilience into something unbreakable. The gun fired and Sophie surged forward, her body remembering what her heart had never forgotten. Her stride was not just fast, it was transcendent. Each step a reclamation of the woman she had been and the woman she still was. The crowd began to stir, heads turning as Sophie moved through the pack, her pace relentless, her form a study in quiet power. The coach's eyes widened, his memory clicking into place. Sophie Rae, the prodigy who had vanished. Whispers spread among the spectators, a murmur of surprise as the housewife they had mocked pulled ahead. The student who had taunted her struggled to keep up her breath, ragged, her confidence unraveling. Sophie didn't look back. She ran for her sister, for the promise, for every moment she had been dismissed as too poor, too plain, too broken to matter. The finish line loomed, and as she crossed it, the clock froze, revealing a time that shattered the course record. The crowd erupted not just in cheers but in awe, their disbelief giving way to a dawning respect. The journalists scrambled their cameras, flashing their notebooks, filling with a story they hadn't expected. The students, once laughing, stood speechless, their TikTok bravado replaced by a humbling silence. The coach approached, his voice thick with emotion, asking if she was the Sophie Rae he remembered. She nodded, her breath steady, her eyes bright with something fiercer than pride, truth. She had left them speechless, not with words, but with the undeniable force of who she was. Sophie Rae, the simple woman they didn't know, had broken more than a record. She had broken the narrative that had tried to define her, proving that greatness doesn't need a spotlight. It burns brightest in those who carry it quietly, waiting for the moment to run. As dusk settled over the university's sprawling stadium, a gentle rain began to fall, casting a soft sheen across the track where Sophie Rae stood poised for the final race. At 26, her pale blonde hair clung damply to her neck, her faded t-shirt and worn leggings darkened by the drizzle. Her old running shoes, frayed at the heels, grounded her beneath the stadium's blazing lights, her calm hazel eyes reflecting a quiet resolve. The crowd, a sea of students, coaches, and journalists, buzzed with anticipation, their earlier mockery of the housewife now tempered by whispers of her stunning qualifying run. Sophie, undeterred by their gaze, carried a promise in her heart to run for her late sister, to honor a vow made in tear-streaked hospital rooms. This was no mere race, it was a reckoning, a moment to reclaim the fire life had tried to extinguish. The air was thick with tension as runners took their places, the rain-slicked track gleaming under the floodlights. Sophie's presence, once invisible, now drew curious glances. The students who had laughed their Lululemon gear pristine despite the weather watched her warily, their TikTok taunts a fading echo. A veteran coach, his face etched with recognition, leaned forward in the stands, his eyes locked on Sophie. He had seen her qualifying runner form, stirring memories of a prodigy who had once carried a nation's hopes. Journalists adjusted their cameras, sensing a story unfolding while the crowd murmured, still unaware of the woman they had dismissed. Sophie stood at the starting line, her breath steady, her mind clear. She wasn't here for their applause or their validation. She was here for her sister, for the girl who had believed in her, for the part of herself she had buried in grief and survival. When the starting gun cracked through the rain-soaked air, Sophie moved with deliberate restraint, settling into a steady middle pace. The university's star runners surged ahead, their strides confident, their names emblazoned on banners. The crowd cheered, expecting a predictable victory, but Sophie's eyes were fixed on the track, her body attuned to a rhythm only she understood. She had once been a national track star, a near Olympian whose talent had promised gold, but she had walked away to care for her dying sister, trading stadiums for hospital vigils. After her sister's death, Sophie had retreated to a small town working as a librarian, her glorious past a secret locked away. Yet the track had never left her, and now with each step she felt its call, a pulse that matched the promise she had made. As the race neared its final 200 meters, something shifted. Sophie's stride lengthened, her body leaning into a gear the others couldn't match. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, heads turning as she began to close the gap. Her movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, as if the rain itself parted for her. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment she seemed to lift off the track, her worn shoes defying their age, her faded clothes a stark contrast to the power propelling her forward, a commentator, his voice trembling with disbelief. On the live stream, leaned into his microphone. Yes, it's Sophie Rae. She was once our nation's hope for gold. The words rippled through the stadium, igniting gasps as spectators pieced together the truth. The simple woman they had mocked was no ordinary runner. She was a force, a prodigy reborn. Sophie surged past the university's stars, her speed a revelation, her focus unbroken. The student who had taunted her in the warm-up, her confidence now frayed, struggled to keep pace, her breath ragged. Sophie didn't glance back. She ran for her sister, for the nights spent whispering promises, for the years she had lived quietly, her brilliance hidden behind a librarian's modesty. The finish line loomed, and as she crossed it, the clock stopped, revealing a time that shattered the university's record. The stadium erupted, not just in cheers, but in a collective awe, the sound swelling like a tide. The rain seemed to pause, as if the world itself was bearing witness to Sophie's triumph. She slowed to a stop, her chest heaving, her face serene, as if she had always known this moment was hers. The crowd rose to its feet, their applause a thunderous acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. The students who had laughed their TikTok caption, a cruel jest, stood among them, their faces a mix of shock and respect. One of them, hands trembling, uploaded a new video, a montage of Sophie crossing the finish line, her stride a blur of grace and power, overlaid with the words, "They mocked her look." She gave them legacy. The clip spread like wildfire, a testament to the woman who had turned their scorn into silence. Journalists swarmed their cameras, flashing their questions, piling up. But Sophie remained calm, her gaze distant, as if her mind were still with her sister. The veteran coach approached, his eyes glistening, and asked if she was the Sophie Rae he remembered. She nodded, her voice soft but steady, her truth no longer a secret. Sophie's victory was more than a broken record. It was a rewriting of the narrative that had tried to define her. She had been forced to prove herself, not because she sought their approval, but because the world had underestimated her, seeing only her faded clothes, her quiet life, her sacrifices. They didn't know she had coached Olympians, her strategies shaping champions, or that she had walked away from glory to hold her sister's hand through the end. They didn't know the strength it took to rebuild a life after loss, to run again, when grief had tethered her to stillness. But now they saw her. Sophie Rae, the simple woman who had left them speechless, her legacy etched not just in the record books, but in the hearts of those who witnessed her run. As the rain tapered off, Sophie stood under the stadium lights, the crowd's applause fading into a quiet hum. She thought of her sister, of the promise kept, of the girl who had believed in her when the world hadn't. This race was her reckoning, a moment to reclaim the fire that had always burned within her, even when no one else could see it. The journalists would write their stories. The students would share their videos, and the coach would tell his colleagues of the prodigy who returned. But for Sophie, the victory was in the quiet certainty that she had honored her sister, that she had run not just for herself, but for every person who had been dismissed, mocked, or forced to prove their worth. As she walked off the track, her worn shoes leaving faint prints in the wet earth, Sophie carried a truth brighter than any medal: she had always been enough. Sophie Rae needed no brand, no trophies, only a track and a promise etched in her heart. In a world clamoring for flashy names and polished facades, this unassuming woman reminded us that true worth lies not in appearances, but in an unbreakable will. Her quiet strength, born of love and loss, reshaped the narrative, proving that dignity outshines judgment. Have you ever misjudged someone too hastily? Share your story below. Your voice matters. If Sophie's journey moved you, like, comment, and subscribe to Sir Alex Stories for more tales where resilience runs deeper than the surface, inspiring us to see beyond the visible.